For those of you who have bought the pattern for this bag, this tutorial is how to get started. Before you get started, it's super important to have some way of marking off the pattern as you go. It can be a little easy to get lost in the beads and to lose your place, but if you mark down as you go which beads you've strung, it makes a huge difference. Before you do any crocheting, it's important to start by stringing up the first section of beads. Both the handle and the bag come in sections, and they're marked off by a pink line that says crochet all strung beads before continuing to the next section. So you'll do a whole section and you'll string up all the beads before you start crocheting anything at all. Just a tip about the needle I'm using, it's called a Big Eye beading needle, and it's super helpful because the whole entire thing is one big hole. So you can just pull it apart and stick your thread in, and it's small enough that it can fit through pretty much any size bead, but it has a big enough hole to fit your thick crochet thread. So reading the actual pattern, this is super simple. You go from left to right and top to bottom. It's just like reading a book, so it's super basic. The only thing that you must do is stop at every pink line to crochet the beads. If you try to do 2 sections at once, your pattern will end up looking super funky, which if you want to do that, that's totally fine, but it's probably not the look you're going for. Looking at the pattern more closely, we can see that each square has a letter, a number, and has a color. The letter and the color help you know what color bead to use. They both match up. And then the number is the number of beads to string. So if I was doing row 7, it'd be 1 gray, 5 blue, and then I'd keep reading the pattern. Once you have all your beads strung up, you're ready to start the actual crocheting. You can take off the needle that you were using to string your beads and then pull out your 1mm crochet hook. You might be able to get by with other sizes, but this one seems to work the best for me. At this point, you'll start chaining the number of stitches around that your pattern is. So the handle and the body of the bag will be different, but it'll say at the top of the pattern. So I just start chaining, and then for the bag I'm working on, it's 120. So once I reach the end, I will stop and I'll connect the beginning of the chain to the end of the chain. It's super important that you don't get things twisted up, because if there's a twist in your pattern, your bag will have a giant twist in it and it definitely won't work. So I'm just being careful to line it up properly. And then if you do have a twist, there are ways to get around it. You don't have to restart the whole pattern, but it's better to just be careful in the first place. So I'll do a slip stitch to connect it. And then once I'm done with that, I'm gonna just do another loop around, just single crochet, just to give ourselves a little bit of a border. It's super helpful later on so that you can sew down the edge, or if you need to sew anything onto it, it just gives you a better surface to work with. Once I get close to looping back to the beginning, I like to pause for a minute and just double check to make sure that everything is lined up well and that everything is looking right. Once I get back to the beginning, I make sure to not miss any of those little stitches. Sometimes they can be a little bit sneaky and they can hide. And then it's okay to continue on beyond where you started. You can even go around another time. Sometimes it's helpful to have just a little bit longer to be working with. So if you want to make a little bit thicker border, that's totally good. Okay, we're switching to another project because the white thread is a little bit easier to see on camera. So every stitch has a front loop and a back loop. It's kind of that V shape at the top that you see. And for bead crochet, I stick with going through the back loop. You could go through both of them, but your work will end up a lot tighter. So if it's loose for whatever reason, you could go through both, but for the size beads and the size string that we're using, it normally works for me to just go through the back. So if you look closely, we start by putting the crochet hook through that back loop. I grab one bead with my finger and then I wrap around the thread. Then I pull it through once and again to finish the stitch. So one more time, that's through the back loop. Then I pull one bead down with my finger and I loop around the thread and pull it through. And then I pull it through one more time to finish the stitch. It's definitely a bit easier to work with bigger beads because you don't have to use your tiny nails on a tiny little bead. You can kind of use the point of your finger to pull the beads down and keep them in place. You'll keep going until you reach the end of the first row, and then this is when I normally pause to double check that I have the exact right count. Even if you're one bead short or one bead over, it can mess up the pattern a lot and it can start to look spirally and shifting. So that's something to watch out for. So right here, I'm close to the end. I count the beads. If I'm short by one, I can actually put 2 beads in one stitch. If I have too many stitches, I can skip one and add a bead to the one right after. So there's ways to fix it if you're pretty close. So this is what it looks like once you finish that first row of beads. It's pretty spirally sometimes, but that's okay. It'll start to lay more flat as you add more rows of beads. Now that you have everything started, it's smooth sailing from here. You just keep crocheting until you run out of beads, and then you cut the string, leaving a little bit of a tail, and then you can string up the beads for the next section. Once the next section is strung, you can tie the ends together and keep crocheting like normal. Make sure that you keep checking in on my page frequently because I'll have more tutorials and tips and tricks as we keep going through this project. And I'm so excited to see how your bags turn out.